Hi all, we're going to have a look now at Howell's second round win in the Jack Spiegel Memorial Tournament. So he recovered very well after his first round defeat at the hands of Hebden, and here he was playing Chris Ward with the white pieces. He played e4, and after Chris played c5, Howell perhaps wisely avoided Chris Ward's Sicilian dragon defence. He played c3. Actually, c3 seemed to be all the rage at Southend, and from the previous year. I was looking through games of the Open, where Robert Eames had won the Open last year, as well as this year, and he's also playing c3. So I don't know if it's because of a dedicated, well-written book about this variation, but the black players really need to be wary. So the natural response is d5, and after e takes d, Queen takes d5, white plays d4, and now Chris Ward played knight f6, and after knight f3 he pinned white's knight. It seems a logical move. Now here is a kind of materialistic move, capturing away from the centre. White played d takes c5. It probably is a highly theoretical position. Black now played Queen takes d1 check. So it seems as though white, has forfeited the right to castle, and is even allowing double pawns, f pawns, and an isolated h pawn if black wants to take on f3. And in fact, after knight c6, white actively encouraged black to smash his pawn structure. He played h3. So it really is a surprising new way to play against the Sicilian defence, this kind of system. Black obliged and took on f3, and after g takes f3, from the Nimzowichian point of view, there's a number of white structural weaknesses. Double pawns there, double pawns here. However, the dark square control is going to be increased with white playing bishop b5 soon, because this knight is useful for controlling some of these squares, like b4. So actually here, after b4, black tries to undermine white's pawns, and now white plays bishop b5. So white is content to have this kind of fawn pawn on the queen side on c5. After knight d5, bishop d2 was played to keep protection of b4. After bishop e7, now a3 was played. This is a dual-purpose move, not just to reinforce b4, but also to prepare white's next move, which is rook a2. After a takes b4, white played now bishop takes c6, perhaps expecting a natural b takes c6. Here's a Rybka variation if b takes c6. So bishop h4 maybe. Now bishop f6 seems natural. And in this kind of variation, with this tactical idea of knight f4, black would be okay, I believe. This is just a sample variation. Black might be equal according to Rybka with rook f4 here. However, Chris Ward, he didn't go in for this. After bishop takes c6, he created a material imbalance. He played b3, which gave white the opportunity to take on d5, and after b takes a2, bishop takes a2, white has two minor pieces for a rook. But with these shattered pawns, maybe Chris Ward felt he was doing fine. Bishop takes c5, king e2. And I was looking at this position, I was wondering when I was playing in the Open, and I thought, well, how does white really get his pieces out? They seem quite passive at the moment. After rook fc8, white now played bishop c1. Actually, let's have a look there. Why couldn't black have taken immediately on a3, for example? Bishop takes a3, knight takes, rook takes. Well, Rybka thinks bishop c4, and it's quite a good position. The two bishops are quite powerful here. There's a possibility of playing rook b1. Okay, so king e2, rook c8, bishop c1 now, protecting that a3 pawn. b5. The b5 pawn is a fixed target, as we'll see later. Bishop b3, so the bishop's starting to wriggle out of a passive position. After bishop e7, now rook d1. White's pieces are growing in strength. King f1, and now bishop e3, offering the trade of rooks. Black first of all takes, before taking on d1, plays rook h5, and after king g2 now takes on d1, and now we see rook d5, bishop e2, king f8, now f4. So potentially white's threatening now bishop f3 or king f3. So this f4 is increasing the quality of white's pieces. After g6, now there's a quiet waiting move, bishop g4. Maybe it's trying to provoke, Howell's trying to provoke h5. Chris Ward actually just played h6 more cautiously, just preparing g5. After bishop e2, now g5. And now bishop f3. After rook d8, now king f1 was played. So the king is rerouting perhaps the e2 to protect the d1 square, which would mean this bishop can be activated freely on this diagonal without worry of rook d1s. So after f5, king e2, so protecting that d1 square, liberating this bishop now. After king f7, we see now an attacking move, bishop c6. It's actually nabbing a very important pawn here. So Chris Ward's counterplay on the king side is becoming more important now to try and establish a passed pawn. So he establishes, tries to do this with g4. After hg, fg, bishop takes b5. White has two candidate passed pawns now. So we see now a race on both sides of the board. h5, a4, h4. Now knight d2 is a useful move, coming to f1 to try and blockade these pawns. So after h3, knight f1, a nice blockade. Rook c8 and now c4. So these pawns march on, but black now tries to blockade with bishop b4. Chris Ward is, however, facing an uphill struggle now after Howell's next move, bishop b6. The bishop is herding the a pawn forward. Rook h8, now knight h2, totally blockading the h pawn. Rook g8, and now knight f1 again. King e7, and now c5. White's pawns seem a bit faster now. Rook c8, c6, bishop d6, and instead of taking time to protect f4 with, say, king e3, well, I think actually rook f8 if king e3, White actually just marched the a pawn now to a6, and after h2 sacrificed the knight spectacularly, actually, because a7, even though the exchange down, is winning here. There's no defence against these pawns. Chris Ward played g3, and after fg, bishop takes g3, bishop a6, Chris Ward resigned. So he resigned because, for example, rook c8, a8 queen, or rook a8, just bishop b7. And after rook a7, bishop a7, I think the king would just march up the board. Here's an example variation of the king marching up the board. The two bishops is a technique win, especially at the grandmaster level. So that would just be a technique win here. Let's have a quick overview and summary. So a Sicilian defence, c3 Sicilian, becoming very, very popular for some reason. And in this variation, it's kind of materialistic and sort of not caring about structure. When white does d takes c5 with the idea of h3, it does get the two bishops, and it does get this outpost pawn on c5, the way it was played by white. And there's also this interesting idea of getting the rook out via a2 after a3 is played. But here we have an immediate controversial material imbalance. So white has two minor pieces for the rook. And we see now here quite a bit of manoeuvring, but these two bishops get more and more dangerous, and they're used to win this b5 pawn. And now here we see in this final phase of the game this race between the passed pawns on both sides of the board, and Howell didn't take time here to protect f4. He just played a5, and we see now a vivid demonstration of how to exploit a passed pawn, just sacrificing a whole piece. So he was exchanged down, but a winning position in the end. So, I hope you enjoyed that game. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.